Well, good evening. Thank you for coming and supporting golf maintenance, and our staff is certainly appreciative of it too. We've got a very good maintenance staff down there. They actually prefer to do manual labor quite a bit of the time, which is unusual for golf maintenance teams, but they like working with each other so much that they prefer to do those tasks so they can talk to each other at the same time, which is beneficial to us. But we certainly thank you all for coming out this evening. Go over some things that we did in the past and plans for the future, and things that we're still working on. Of course, probably one of the biggest complaints I've had since I've been here is that I took a divot box off of number 4 for repair, so we definitely know that everybody's very supportive of maintenance and getting the course in as good a shape as it can be. Let's see. But yeah, it's one of the most important things is that we've got a nice commitment from the ownership demonstrated by them by increasing our pretty much anything that we've asked for so far. They've supplied for us, and they want to continue to support us on projects and plans for the future to get the golf course in the best playing conditions that we can. And the more support and feedback that they hear from the members in the positive direction, the more it helps us track things in the right direction. To talk just a little bit about Bermuda grass and the way that it grows, and the main reason we're going to talk about that is just so you understand, because a lot of times if you look at a northern golf course, there's just not so much variation in the conditions, where when you're in a Bermuda grass golf course or a southern grass golf course, specifically in North Florida, you can have quite a bit of difference, primarily just because of the traits of Bermuda grass, soil, and temperatures. And basically the way Bermuda grass grows, it's not seeded like your northern grasses. So the way you propagate Bermuda grass, it's either by sprigs, sod, aerification plugs, or it grows laterally. So when it's actively growing, you can fertilize it and you can move some grass pretty good. If you see, we've filled in probably in the last 45 days a good 10 or 15% of the rough areas, which we could do as much as we wanted to in the cooler weather, and we just couldn't move grass in those areas. Other ways to encourage the growth is to decompact areas, because of course when it's compacted it's hard for things to grow. We can top dress with some organic material, because as the grass moves laterally, if it has something to tack onto, it makes it a lot easier for it to move. As I'm sure you've saw what we did on 4 fairway and 16 fairway when we were struggling. We top dressed them pretty heavy, and it gave the grass a good area to move and recover, and just something to tack onto. And you'll see as we're going around with some of the areas that we struggle with, we're going to go out and hand top dress those areas to give it every chance that it can to fill in. The other thing we're doing is pretty much every week to 2 weeks we're throwing fertilizer, but we're not throwing fertilizer on the entire golf course. We're just fertilizing the areas that are struggling, and our goal is to try and get conditions as consistent around the property as we can. So we feel that if we treat everything the same, it'll all be a little bit different. Of course, some areas are sandier, they have nematode issues, they dry out quicker, so we're doing a lot of testing to try and figure out what the problem is in those areas in order to fix it. Sometimes we just need to put a different grass in there that does better in those areas as well. Let's see. And then we do have some zoysia grass out there as well. It's difficult when you have 2 grasses or 2 different varieties, because you're sometimes the conditions are better for one grass to grow than another grass. which we've got, just to mention a few areas, obviously 14 and 16 tee box are some of the zoysia areas, and you'll notice on 4, 8, 14 and 18 fairway, we've got some zoysia grass taking over. We just try to, until we would regrass the course, we just try to favor each grass in those areas, because the primary goal is to have full coverage regardless of what grass it is. Advantages to zoysia grass is that it needs quite a bit less fertility. It does quite a bit better in the shade, so that's probably why originally they put it in, especially on some of the professional tees. Problems with zoysia grass is when it gets into cold weather, once it's susceptible to disease, and once it gets disease, you really don't grow out of it. So once you get it, you can't just spray it and treat it. Even though the disease may no longer be active, it's still visually there. It really doesn't cause much damage other than visually. It just doesn't look as appealing. And then as far as they just wanted me to kind of go over each year kind of what our goals were and our thinking was on things. And when I say years, haven't completed my second year yet, but I'm more focusing on the season. So the first started in August, so that would be year 1. Then last year would be year 2, and then this would be starting into the 3rd year as far as the seasons are concerned. The first year, the biggest issue that we had significant weed and insect pressure, and the plant health was not very good. So as far as the greens went, we didn't want to push them as far as playability. We wanted to get the roots deeper and healthier, and focus on density versus low cutting heights and things of that nature, because if we tried to push them too hard, we would have lost grass and thinned out. Also, we had quite a bit of a mole cricket infestation, so we had to spray several areas of the golf course with insecticide quite a few times, specifically areas that were all close to the clubhouse as far as where it had more light. So holes on 1, 9, 18, 10, they were all infected quite a bit worse with mole crickets or sod webworms. And then as we were killing weeds, because there was quite a significant weed population down there, it was hard to tell whether you were having insect damage or not. So now that we've got the weed population under control, it's quite a bit easier to visually see some of the issues that we've had. Then we also had quite a bit of storm damage that first year as well, so we got additional funding from the ownership. We probably spent an additional $350,000 plus, in addition to increased operation funds, which included removal of 600 damaged trees, repairing all the coquina carp paths, adding about 60 loads of bunker sand out there, and just fixing other storm damage issues, and the sinkhole on the right side of 10, which the contractor probably wish he had a different bid on that, because he thought it was going to take him one day, and just to honor the bid, he had to actually bring in, I can't think of the word, but he had to bring in a big massive pump and basically remove all the water there, and it took him probably 2 or 3 weeks instead of one day. But we got very lucky there. If you want to put up some of the pictures there. Yeah, so this is just kind of an example of the difference between 4 currently and 4 now. And a lot of if you remember this area here on the right side of number 4, basically we just came in there and top dressed it and fertilized it. A lot of those thin areas were not because of anything other than insect and weed activity, and we just basically had to grow it back in. Some of the other thin areas that you see are either sandy areas or they were infected with some insects. What we're learning here recently is Bermuda grass mites, which is recently a new issue to Bermuda grass, affects the common Bermuda only, which kind of grows right along the edge of the property line. And there's a few new techniques that we can do to treat for that. One of them being not even killing the insect, but drastically lowering the heights of cut in the winter, coming out of the winter, so they don't have a habitat to live in, because they live underneath these grass plants, and it's very difficult to treat it with chemicals. So if we can eradicate their habitat, it's going to help us be quite a bit more successful. Another thing that they're recommending is that we continue fertility programs in the rough throughout the winter to try and keep the Bermuda grass from going as dormant as it can. That's probably why our shorter turf areas are quite a bit more successful than the out of the way areas. Okay. Oh, okay, so that's a picture of, that's kind of an idea of the excessive weed damage that we had in the beginning. And of course, to kill those weeds, you have to put quite a bit of chemical treatments out there. You can't just spot treat areas like that. You need to boom spray and continue to apply, and then but it's turned out pretty nice, I would say.
Not the whole golf course after seeing those pictures. That looks amazing.
And you can see here on number 1 and 9 the same thing, and that's pretty much a lot of these areas now that were some of the worst areas. We're basically every 2 weeks we're treating with the organic fertilizer, the same fertilizer that we're running along the edge of the property lines to help us fill in and grow without using chemical fertility. And the nice thing about using organics is it's a slow release, so we constantly have some food source in the system. Oh, okay, so here's another pretty much a similar example. That 6 and 6 there. Of course, that on the back, the picture before there, of course you can see that the overseed there. It's very difficult when you have overseed and then you transition to have healthy Bermuda grass underneath that, which is one of the things that we focus on the second year, is to discontinue the overseeding process to make things quite a bit easier to grow and transition in the long run. Some of the other things we focus on is some traffic control. The less traffic that we get in some areas, the better they are. If you notice, we roped off 16 entirely for quite a while. It's a little difficult to rope off the hill on number 1 and 9, and it doesn't look very attractive, but we will.
Don't be an idiot and drive up there if you don't have to. This is what we're trying to say.
And then we did the same thing on number 14 as well. And 16.
17. Yeah, 16 he saved by 14 saved by roping off, and 17. Yeah, 16. 16 was all of yeah, exactly.
One of the things that we've focused on from the very beginning is we've signed on a consultant for fertility and soils, and the reason we did that is typically your fertilizer and chemical salesman will do that for you for free. However, in exchange, they want you to buy their products. So sometimes they can skew the results to how it works best for them. So what we do on the greens, we take a sample of the grass clippings once a week. We mail it off. They can see what's actually in the plant. versus the soil, and that way we know what to spray. For an example, several golf courses every week spray calcium, they spray iron, and they spray these products, but they don't test. Every time we test our tissue for iron, calcium, and some of the other standard sprays, they're very high in the tissue sample, so it doesn't necessarily save us money, but then we recoup that money and we put out some nutrients that are lacking in the soil, which potassium, if we need to put phosphorus out, or any micronutrients, and they measure them at very small percentages, parts per million. So the only way to do that is to send it off into a lab and check it. It's great to check the soil, which we do every 6 months. However, it very rarely changes, where the tissue and what's being uptaken in the plant is changing every few days. And it also, we can visually see right on the test results whether we have an issue with sodium or not. And what that tells us is if we need to flush the plant and get the sodium out of the soil. There's ways to visually see these things too, but it's nice to see it on paper sometimes, and they actually give you some guidelines to work with. We also, when we test the soils, it determines what types of granular products we buy, whether it would be a sulfate or a nitrate, depending on what's going to work best for this property. The same with the water. We check our water every few months just to make sure that we don't have any, not necessarily pollution, but any situations that could affect us, and we may need to treat the lakes, or some chemical may have got in there from however, and we can avoid some bad problems. The other thing we can check for is nematodes, because there's 2 different types of nematodes, and knowing which one tells you which chemical to use, and then we need to know whether we've been effective with the chemical treatment or not. A nematode I would explain it best as a microscopic insect that feeds on the root system. And untreated, you can lose quite a bit of grass. If anybody knows what spotted spurge looks like, if you see spotted spurge, that's basically an indicator weed, and it will tell you 9 times out of 10 that you have a nematode. However, it won't tell you what type. It's measured per 100 cc's of soil, and if you have more than 6 to 10 sting nematodes, you're pretty lucky if you can grow grass. Lance nematodes and root knot, you're probably in the 40 to 60 per cc's of soil, and that's a very small area. But one of the ways that you can, of course, we're not going to treat fairways and rough. The best thing you can do there is use organic materials, because they love sandy soils and they don't like things that are wet. So if you use wetting agents, organic materials and things of that nature, you pretty much outgrow them. And then if there's some areas that you know that you're really going to struggle, that's where you'll use your nematicides. Luckily, they've come out with some new ones here recently that work very well, as long as you understand how the chemistry works with them. And we're lucky because we have, because some of the vendors know that we'll advertise the results of their products. We have several chemical vendors that give us free product to test for them and show what it'll do. One of the other things we focus on this winter is cleaning up some of the overgrown areas, lakes and things of that nature for line of sight. We purchased a massive hedge trimmer to try and clean up the cart paths. Of course, we didn't get quite as far as we'd like to, but it's going to be an ongoing process, and we'll try to do our best to do some of that through the season too, so you can drive through the areas a little bit better. And then as far as if we could go to year 3. As far as our plans, basically starting this year, our main focus is to improve the complexes on the greens and tees and get the tee surfaces as good as they can. Next week we'll be leveling and converting number 7 tee to celebration grass. We've done quite a few others this winter. Earlier than as scheduled, I believe we had some insect damage on some of our collars and approaches right around March and April, and it was tough to grow out of it, so we just decided to sod and get some grass back there as quick as we could, so you didn't have to play on some not the best playing conditions. And I've been asked, as far as the sod, what can we do to get that a little bit more level, other than, allowing it to mature and fill in. This coming week we'll be aerifying and top dressing and verticutting, and the more of those cultural practices that we do to those areas, the better they're gonna get. But we'll have an ongoing plan of leveling and regrassing some of these tees to different grasses. Number 9 would be the next one, because it's got grass on it now, but it's quite on level, and then I'm sure a few of the par 3s will be plan in the future too. As far as we don't have a specific plan other than our plans are to get the golf course as good as it can. We'll be working with ownership to come up with probably a 3-year plan of improvement. Some of that, one of our ideas would be to reshape number 15 instead of putting steps in there, smoothing the hill out there, and improving the drainage on that area. Okay.
Well, we want to thank David for taking the time to spend time with us, and we're going to open up for questions in just a minute. But I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, past performance is the best predictor of future performance. And when you look at the before and after of those pictures, and you hear of all the science that David brings to us, I believe that we're going to have a great golf course as he continues to lead us. So thank you, David, on that.